Welcome Home, a podcast for veterans about veterans by veterans, is a project of Willing Warriors and the Warrior Retreat at Bull Run.
Good morning. I'm your host, Larry Ziliox, Director of Culinary Services here at the Warrior Retreat at Bull Run. This is our first episode of Season 4, and I'm very excited to have with us as a guest today Rear Admiral Michael Studeman, who is retired Navy Rear Admiral. I'm not going to go through his biography because I'm sure he's tired of sitting and listening to people tick off all the things he did over an extensive career. So if you're interested in that, just do the Google thing and you'll get all that information. So I just want to jump into it and talk to him about a number of issues. He's written a book, which I'm very excited about. Admiral, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Larry, thanks, and I appreciate being here, and thanks for your service over the years. I'm really impressed with what you do in terms of volunteering your time and helping the warriors who come to this retreat reconnect, heal, restore their connections with their family, and have a chance to have new hope for their future ahead. And so really impressed with you and the others who are part of this organization.
Well, thank you for that. And we're so thankful for your support. You were our gala speaker this year at our 2025 gala. It really helps us when we get prior service individuals who are willing to stand up and talk and say, hey, this is an organization that it does good work, and you should support it. And we really appreciate that. I wanted to dive right in with one of the questions that I ask regularly for most of my guests is, why did you join the Navy and not the Air Force?
Well, I will tell you, my father was in the Navy and was a four-star admiral, so that might have had a small influence. But frankly, he didn't pressure me much. I didn't know what I really wanted to do. I didn't go to the Naval Academy. I went to William & Mary down in Williamsburg. And, to be honest, I read a book, a fictional novel by Stephen Kuntz called Flight of the Intruder. I kind of described this in my first chapter of my leadership book. And naval aviation interested me. I always, wanted to fly, and they had a backlog of people who joined naval aviation from Top Gun in the mid-'80s, and so I couldn't go right in as an aviator. They said, you know what, if you go intelligence, which was your number 2 choice on your list of preferences, that most of the first tours are in squadrons. And if you do well in your intel school, you might get a choice of squadron types. And that's exactly what happened. So I went to Officer Candidate School. I placed the top of my intel school, and before I knew it, I was qualified to fly with my A-6 Intruder squadron, which is a medium attack bomber flying off aircraft carriers that has 2 seats side by side, the bombardier navigator to the right, the pilot to the left. And within a few months of being part of the squadron as an ensign, I was able to, enjoy flying off aircraft carriers and landing on them and experiencing everything that I had hoped for.
As an air intelligence officer, is flying part of the job, or were you just hitching a ride?
No, it's normally you are there in a support role. You're there to describe, current events, to be able to understand adversary capabilities, to understand, threat, aircraft and surface-to-air missile systems, anti-aircraft artillery, dangers, opportunities, things like that. So you do strike planning. You're there for debriefs. You're there for a host of other kinds of things that relate to analysis. Your squadron has to support you wanting to fly. And they wanted to make, my call sign was Studman. They wanted to make Studman puke, frankly. They wanted to have some fun with their junior intel officer. And so I was like, okay, try to make me, get sick in the cockpit. So it was a great squadron, VA-35, the Black Panthers. We still get together repeatedly. We were brought together in bonds of combat during Desert Storm. I wasn't The one at risk was all the rest of the aviators who were going all the way over to the Kuwaiti Theater of Operations and also into Iraq, around Baghdad and Western Iraq. I would do some flights during the war, in addition to my intel responsibilities, to be able to kind of relieve some of the duties for the bombardier navigators, doing, some tanking in the Red Sea, helping out where I could there. So it was unusual for air intelligence officers to fly with, but if you're really passionate about it and you have a good squadron, you can do it.
For those of us who weren't in the Navy, a rear admiral has how many stars?
Well, there's a rear admiral lower half, and that's the 1 star.
Okay.
And then I was a rear admiral upper half, which was a 2-star admiral, before I retired.
Is that the only service branch that does that, upper and lower half?
It does. It's a bit strange. So we've had different kind of rank structures over time. In fact, my father, when he was going through the ranks, went from captain, A-6, to Commodore. Like today, what we call a rear admiral lower half. Back in the late 70s, early 80s, they had it listed as a Commodore, which is a throwback all the way to sort of the 19th century.
Yeah.
And so we now have settled on, upper and lower half. But yeah, that's a bit strange.
Yeah.
I agree.
One thing I want our listeners to pay attention to is if you're thinking about a career field and you can test into it and you've got the smarts to do it, and not everybody does, but the intelligence career field is really something you need to seriously take a look at for a couple of reasons. One is you're going to get a job when you get out. I guarantee you, especially if you're around the Washington, D.C. area, number one. Number two, looking over your assignment history, it seems like the intelligence guys get to go to some really nice places like Hawaii, like Rota, Spain, which is an awesome assignment. So think about it. You could have gone to a service academy in a heartbeat with your father's history, but you chose William and Mary, which, by the way, is an awesome school. It's a beautiful school, has an amazing law school. Why did you end up there?
Well, I will tell you that I did apply to the academy. I did have a presidential nomination and a senatorial nomination. I only applied to a few schools, I think 3 total. And the Naval Academy did not grant a waiver at the time because my eyes were bad even coming out of high school. And they had the option to choose people that sort of had those kinds of nominations but didn't have any kind of medical issues. So really, my eyes did me in. And I'm happy for it, frankly. I met my wife sophomore year at William & Mary, a love of my life, and we, I can't imagine my existence sort of without her. Some of my best friends from there, and the education that you get out of William & Mary is first in class. I mean, best in the nation on so many different levels there, and so I'm proud to be a William & Mary alumni, and they've got fantastic programs today that continue to serve the nation in many important ways.
So you decide to go into the Navy, finally, and intelligence, I guess, was plan B, but was there any other career field you were looking at in the Navy, or was it just going to be either I fly or I go into intelligence?
That was it. If they didn't hook me with the naval aviation part somehow, some way, I may have gone a different path. They do these tests. You remember these in high school where they say, hey, here your career field, answer all these questions. You kind of took the test in the library. And there were a couple of things that popped out. I was either going to be a military officer or I was going to be like a National Geographic photojournalist, something in that field. Because I answered all these questions about, traveling abroad, like new things, like exploring, like taking responsibility, like making a difference in your world. And so those are the 2 top things. So it's funny how that's worked out.
Yeah. So another important decision point for you comes when you go to the DLI, which, again, another choice assignment, that's Monterey, California, and you're a fluent Mandarin Chinese speaker. Did somebody say you needed to do that, or did you volunteer to do that?
No, let me first, fluent is way too generous. I was probably, pretty good for the amount of time that they give you at the Defense Language Institute. I was the top of my class, number 2. And I think at that point, you know how to talk government issues with somebody else talking Chinese government issues. But your vocabulary is essentially sort of 4th grade, level. And if you don't keep it up, it begins to fade. And so
Sure.
my Chinese is very rusty right now. But I will tell you that choice was mine. That it actually was rooted in my Intel school. In 1989, one of my first briefings as part of like the grading criteria for passing was to brief on a developing situation. And I had been tracking the Tiananmen Square protests that had been building through the spring and into May and then June of 1989. And I'm still an impressionable sort of 21-year-old. And my first briefing kind of described the situation. And then in a follow-up briefing there, graded, I had to describe the bloodshed of the massacre that occurred in Tiananmen Square. And to me, it was a very important lesson here on the nature of power, but also the nature of authoritarianism and where the Chinese Communist Party was going. So back then, this was a seed that was planted, and I didn't know how it would change my life. But I realized something that I think it's taken almost 20 or 30 years for other people to realize. And that is that a powerful China, one that had been growing stronger and stronger since Deng Xiaoping took power in the late 1970s after Mao Zedong, a China that's strong economically, but politically does not intend to give up any of its power or to liberalize. And that's what was proven in 1989. It was Deng Xiaoping. This guy came over to the United States, Reagan took him around, and he was in Texas with a cowboy hat on with this toothy grin. And you're like, okay, China's going to change. And in fact, he's the guy that ordered the massacre, right, in Tiananmen Square and the streets leading out of Tiananmen Square. So if a guy like that, right, is going to make a decision there, then I concluded back then that you're going to have a powerful adversarial country, which will be just as dictatorial and autocratic as anything that we saw in the Soviet Union. And it would, over time, become a major challenge to the United States and the rest of the Western world. And I did a tour analytically in an analytic center in Spain after the squadron. And I asked for education, and they gave it to me. I said, I'd like to go to get postgraduate studies, and I'd like to study East Asia with a particular focus on China. And at the time, those programs were connected to a language. And so I ended up in Chinese as part of my master's degree program. And I felt way back then that this was going to be a problem. And frankly, even if I walk around today, I speak a lot on China matters, I still have to convince people that this is a major issue and why. It is so huge. It is much more dangerous than ever and harder than the Soviet Union problem. And I know this because my father, who was a Cold War warrior, has said that compared to the Soviet Union, the China problem is much more complex. It is much harder, and we have a lot more to lose there. And so anyway, that's the story of how I sort of got into this concentration.
Yeah. No, I don't think people realize all the super chips for everything, including their iPhone and everything else, is in Taiwan. And China has their eyes on Taiwan. And that could break out at any time.
Yeah, it's a complex thing. I talk about this. You'd have to unpack another 4 podcasts for us to kind of go into it. But you're right to be concerned. But it's not just what happens over there. It's about the exploitation that occurs inside, our country, and how much of our intellectual property and secrets are being stolen, and how much the Chinese intend to supplant us in so many different levels. And they're going gangbusters, and frankly, fighting each other internally and treating your neighbor as your enemy at a time when you have somebody that's actually on the verge, if not winning, the techno-economic war, right? is a form of insanity to me.
Yeah.
That you can be so head in the sand domestically that you can't realize that you need to come together and unify for common cause based on an external nation-state threat, which is going to feel itself in every sector, not just militarily, right? Talking economically, which will affect every American.
Yeah.
To me, there's this wake-up call. I do my best to describe this challenge, and a lot of people just want to whistle through the graveyard on this.
Well, you're right. That's like a whole bunch of different podcasts. You were on the Saratoga, and you were doing flight operations, and then you had assignments on shore. And thinking back over all your onshore assignments, which was your favorite?
Well, I think everybody would agree that no matter where you live, no matter kind of the experiences you have in various tours, that the ultimate test of an officer is in command. And in command, you are challenged more as a human being than in any other place. And you've got to get it right, and you've got to rise up and do extraordinary things to be worthy of the people in your charge and to advance the mission. And so my favorite tours are the ones where, I had the responsibility of command, and we linked arms, and we had the esprit de corps to focus on, those things that were put in front of us. Even when, my first command was the Hopper Global Communications Center. And I will admit to you, I dislike information technology. And so the Navy has a sense of humor. And so my first command was with 900 folks that are part of this command responsible for essentially classified information technology. But I chose that command over going to another, almost a kingmaker position as a numbered fleet, a fifth fleet intelligence officer. I chose command because I believe so strongly that that's where an officer needs to really go and to have that experience. I ended up with 3 different commands over the course of my career. Each one of them were equally rewarding.
And you decided to write the book. Now, listeners, the book is called Might of the Chain, Forging Leaders of Iron Integrity. And I want everybody to go get a copy on Amazon. I just got my copy, so I haven't read it, but I'm going to start reading it tonight. Talk a little bit about the premise of the book. When did you decide I want to write a book? Was it before you got out, or have you been thinking about this and sort of, jotting down ideas for years, or how did this come to you?
I first started to actually pen down my thoughts on leadership when I took command, my first command, and I did so through all of my command and senior staff positions. I would every 2 weeks send out a very short, what I call leadership minute, which was designed for you to actually be able to read in less than 60 seconds. And I would spend 3 or 4 paragraphs just talking about an aspect of leadership. And I collected those over time. And this book has about 4 dozen leadership traits with stories related to each one to highlight the characteristic and some key takeaways. As I approached retirement after 35 years in the Navy, and I looked around at America, right, and saw all these statistics here about the lack of trust in leaders, right? People don't respect their leaders, and they don't want to be like their leaders, et cetera. I mean, these statistics are, part of scientific studies that have been done. And I observed anecdotally my own kind of impressions of people of influence, very powerful people in our country, whether you're talking about in business, whether you talk about them being in academia, or in the media, or in politics. And they're expressing a different kind of leadership. They may have a title, but they're not exercising their responsibilities the right way. And I thought it was time to get back to the basics and to remind people exactly how to lead with honor and principles and ethics and transparency and authenticity and honesty. It's not that hard to be a good leader, but instead we see in our country this tide of people of relatively low character or who are centered on greed, self-interest, being the ones that are now controlling the destiny of the nation. And this isn't a comment on Republican or Democratic, systems. This is a comment about some of the senior people that have taken up these positions or given rights to make big calls about the future of the United States. And I said to myself, look, when I have free time, I'm going to go ahead and wherever it tells you to rest, right? Hey, take 3 to 6 months off. You don't know how tired you are. People like me who are still, I think, at the peak of your capabilities, right? They're coming off, doing things in service. You can't just go down to, after 100 miles an hour, go down to zero, right?
I know.
You become your own self-tasker. And that's what I did. I said, okay, Mike, buckle down. Now you have the free time. Do what you know is right for the country. And if you can influence just a few people to think about and actualize leadership the proper way, you will help make a difference in small circles that hopefully grow into bigger circles. And maybe we can turn the tide here on what I sometimes describe as misleadership. Like you may have a title, but you're a misleader if you have low character or you're not guiding your decisions in the right way, taking a look at how you serve others and not yourself. And so anyway, that's the reason why I wrote the book, and I'll continue to try to spread the message. This isn't about revenue. This is about how to influence people to up their game and to be better people and to figure out how to lead honorably.
Again, listeners, it's Might of the Chain, Forging Leaders of Iron Integrity. I'm going to put a link in the show notes to this on Amazon. Go ahead and click it and do the one-click thing. Buy it right away. I guarantee you won't be disappointed. So you start to write the book, and then you look back over all of your notes from when you were doing your 60-second leadership notes. Did you look at any of them and go, well, what was I thinking?
It's funny that you should point that out, because I do think that you grow and mature and change over time. So the things that I may have written when I first took command in 2013 were modified over time. Like I'd come back to them and say, there's a little bit more to add on that, because I had, deeper, richer, wider experiences, and I thought that I could sort of tweak and refine. And so I didn't overhaul those things because they were, mainly right. But I thought there's a way to further color these with a little more depth of experience. So yes, they became for me sort of living leadership insights.
Most of our listeners are veterans, and we do have active duty listeners as well. And at every point in most service members' careers, they begin to take on leadership roles, from whether it's a squad sergeant, whether it's a chief petty officer, all the way up to a 4-star admiral or general. And with that comes the responsibility of overseeing those below you that are assigned to you. And on the enlisted level, you're generally, while you are in charge, it's very family oriented. You become very close to the people that you're responsible for. Now, as you move up the chain and you get to the command level, you don't know everybody. And I'm curious as to how you found the weight of command and the responsibilities for the welfare of those below you, how that changed as you went up the chain of command.
I do think it changes with the size of the command and the geographic disposition. If you're spread out all over, it's just harder to get the direct contact and the touch time, that you need. And so, and each organization has their own culture. And you may have inherited a thriving culture, which is doing the right things, or you may have had, the misfortune of getting a troubled command that has come out of some, grievous situations. And so you got to know kind of what you're stepping into. Are you more of a steward that continues sort of on this noble course where things are going right, or are you going to have to address some correctives that need to be in place within your command? Are you going to be faced with a restructure? Do you have to restructure it yourself, which I would advise you do sparingly because of the disruption associated with it. Most people change things, and the grueling change tends not to be worth whatever outcomes that you thought you would get.
Right.
So you have to be very conservative and careful about that, in my view. But you may have a restructuring that's foisted on you from above. It says, hey, you're going to come in and do the following. So in each case, you'll encounter a different situation, and you need to tailor, how you approach it. And that's what's so dynamic about command, is that you never perfect it. You never perfect being a leader. Just in philosophically taking a look at that, no matter what situation you're in, you don't have to be in command. And everyone is a leader and everyone a follower, no matter where you are in the chain of command. From day one of you putting on a uniform, you're a leader. And so you have to commit yourself to being better tomorrow than you were yesterday. And that takes sort of an active attentiveness to how you're interacting with others, what effect you're having, the people that work for you, how well they're performing their respective duties. It's not just sort of the officer corps that may be beneath you, but it's the whole senior enlisted ranks. It's civilians, actually, that are part of many of our organizations, and how you lead civilians is maybe a little bit different than how you might lead a junior enlisted. And so this is the challenge and the excitement of it all, is that you're presented with these conditions. Here's a snapshot of time. Here's the condition of the organization, and then all the people move all the time, right? We're flowing every 2 or 3 years. You've got a new crop of folks that kind of come in, and so the personalities change around, and so the challenges never stop. So the way to command is there. You never can walk away from your command. You will get those calls late on a Saturday night about an accident or somebody with an illness, or if it's not them, it may be their parents or their kids or something like that. And so, that weight is with you all the time. It is a very high gravity sort of responsibility. And like I said, I think it tests every molecule of your being. Are you fair-minded? How do you actually distinguish between administering justice and delivering sort of mercy there? What's the challenge between short-term decisions versus their long-term effects, dealing with individuals versus the organization? Most people, when they describe ethical situations, they say that it's not, the hard ones aren't wrong versus right. It's actually right versus right. And so how do you discriminate which is the better right and which is the less appropriate right? And those require all of your senses, all of your commitment. You have to listen to folks, because you're not going to, at the top, particularly when you have a big organization, you can't rely on your direct primary source, material, like your actual relationship with these people or the situations. You're going to have to trust other people. If you haven't created a culture of trust and openness and the willingness to, lean in with others, then you're going to find yourself in that ivory tower situation where you're going to make bad calls on all the things I just talked about, because you're not, integrated into sort of the heart of that command, where you've created a sense that you're all in it together, right? You have to be careful of adding too much verticality in the hierarchy. You need to combine the horizontal connections, right? We need to flatten organizations where you can, without flattening to the point where it's sort of just chaos.
Do you ever get the sense that people under you were, I don't know how to describe this. Let me just talk a little bit about my memory of, I was on Guam, and I remember the order came down that every morning at like 6 o'clock in the morning, we had to send guys out to pick up trash along a certain route. And finally we were like, what's the deal? Well, it's a general's jogging route. And it's like, well, isn't he driving around the rest of the base and seeing trash? What? No, it's a general's jogging route. So, and I remember one time it was going to be a big hoop-de-doo. Somebody was coming, and it was all about mapping out the route that they were taking and then painting everything along the route. And I got the sense that when the higher up command showed up, what they were seeing was not what was really going on. And I know you had to be aware that people are trying to put their best foot forward and face forward and everything. And how did you deal with that to make sure that you were getting the best information or the best picture of what was actually happening?
Yeah, I think that's not an example of how to do it right. I mean, I think it's human nature for people to want to show off, sort of the best, facade of a situation or a place or a mission or a command. And unfortunately, when I hear stories like that, a little part of me kind of dies inside. I mean, it should be the general that goes and decides to stop on his path with a small garbage bag and pick up the trash yourself. That to me is a real leader, right? And you see real leaders that do that in their organization. There's a small scrap of paper that's there in the passageway. Do you walk by it, or do you, Captain Schmuckatelli, pick it up and put it in your pocket without trying to get any kind of comment or reward? And maybe nobody's in the hallway. That to me, doing the right thing without anybody else looking and not expecting a reward is the right thing to do. So let's just kind of put that where that is. I do think that if you're in command, that the danger exists that you'll have maybe a lot of people telling you what you want to hear, right? And then just trying to please you. And the way out of that is to make sure that you pick the right people around you and people who will tell the truth. And you have to sometimes pick some of the mavericks, and you need to protect them. The people that are bloody-minded, that may not get along with everybody, but that in fact they're going to call it like it is, and you need somebody in your circle of trust to do that. In fact, more than one. And you also need to manage by walking around. Look, I learned more intel, essentially, about what was happening in my commands when I slipped sort of the aids and was able to, by myself, kind of go around and just, go into work centers and talk to folks in their cubicles and just listen. Not be in transmit mode, but to be interested and curious. And it's amazing what people tell you. And if you don't do that, if you don't get around, right, and if you have a command that's not in one place, that's harder to do. You still need to get your butt out there, and you need to circulate, and you need to give opportunities for people to give feedback. I would go ahead and also have a anonymous electronic feedback box, essentially. We would also have the ones where you can sort of write in there if you want. And when I got anything electronically or physically, we would go ahead and say, here's the issue, and here's what we've done about the issue. I would get in my command of the Office of Naval Intelligence, I could do a loudspeaker across, this is an organization with, over 2,000 people, 4,000 spread out over the course of reservists and all the rest. I would get on the speaker every week, and I would give an update on what's going on, give them a sense of kind of what's happening at the more strategic level, thank people for X, Y, and Z. And if there were issues, right, we would talk about some of those issues, say, hey, you got a question here, which is, the answer is relevant to all of you. Or I would email out, hey, we got this question, and here's what we've done about it. And so everybody could see that we were acting on their concerns. So it was an expression of care, right? Expression that the question mattered no matter how silly it might be. And we dealt with it, that way. So I do think there are lots of ways to be able to create those channels of communication. You have to go at it non-traditionally, but people need to feel like they are trusted, and that when they do speak up, that you're going to address it in some way, shape, or form. We actually started with another little trick for those of you who are kind of in positions of leadership. I asked the IT people every Tuesday morning, when we had to do a reboot of our systems and upgrade and patch, that we would go ahead and reboot. And so when people logged on, they would have a question that they would answer, and they could just answer it in like 5 seconds. And so everybody in the command would have a question like, has your supervisor praised you recently? And the answers were interesting, because if you're the supervisor, it's like, ooh, have I been praising my people well enough? And are they going to find out that, we don't have a lot of yes answers in this particular division? And so those prompts like that, right, a sort of a novel way of also soliciting feedback and getting a pulse on your organization, really, really important to make good decisions on behalf of that organization.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk a little bit about before we wrap up, how important intelligence is to mission success. And it is, I feel it's so important for our warfighters to have as clear a picture of what an operational area looks like, what the forces or cartel or whoever they're going to go up against these days. And that all comes by intelligence. Now, whether it's human intelligence or signal intelligence or any number of different ways, but how important is it to the mission that it's collected and it's analyzed properly and then disseminated properly? What do you feel is the thing that most people don't understand about the intelligence product?
Well, I thank you for raising this. I do think that we're finding that intelligence is unfortunately being subjected to politicization at the strategic level. And it's really important if we just take a look at America. This is like a bigger issue than just a single command that's kind of delivering, a mission outcome where intelligence is embedded in all stages of the operation. You're there in the beginning, you're there in the middle, helping to make decisions, anticipating what the bad guys are doing, evaluating, some of the campaign effects or the mission effects, and moving on. It's a continuous process all the time. Intelligence never stops, just like operations don't stop. At the strategic level, just like in a microcosm down at the tactical level, you got to make sure clean information feeds decision-making so you can make the most informed decision. And this is the challenge today when you have so many conspiracy theories or you have so many biases in play, that intelligence is seen as just one of many voices, as if it's equal to somebody's opinion or somebody's single experience over here in the business sector. And I'm afraid that we're seeing a dilution and a diminution of the importance of validated information to the extent you can possibly validate, right? And we spend all of our tradecraft in making sure that we have verifiable facts and good information, right? And we will be honest about what we don't know as well as what we do know, and we describe what we think.
As well as credibility of the information you're providing.
That's right. And so we'll talk about our sources, we'll talk about our confidence levels, we'll talk about where we have key gaps, we'll talk about likely courses of action, and so on and so forth. So we're very, very disciplined in the intelligence field, nonpartisan, to try to make sure that a decision maker has the best possible working knowledge to be able to make a decision, even when you face ambiguity and where you don't have all the information that you'd like to have. We give the best. And for that to be somehow sort of challenged in our political environment makes for bad policy. And you're seeing that today, frankly. Some of the choices that we're making are not actually grounded in sufficiently reliable, validated information. And so we're going to have a problem, Houston, if we don't get back to the basics and start agreeing on the facts, right? And talking about the pros and cons of different issues so that we can do the right thing for the American people.
And the people that work in the field, I want our listeners to understand that they're just not crunching numbers. They have a very clear understanding of the gravity of what they do, that if they don't get it right, somebody might not be going home. And I think sometimes people don't understand that the analysts and the people in the career field really are trying to do the absolute best that they can at their job.
Right. When you look at intelligence people, you're not just back in headquarters, back in the continental United States, sort of just writing a report or whatever. We have intelligence people spread all over every unit forward. We inhabit the weapon system just like operators inhabit their weapon systems. And we're there with a very keen understanding of the mission at hand And this is the reason why, you need all your support staff that's there. Everybody plays a key role, whether you're talking about logistics or you're talking about, administrative information technology support all the way through to the intelligence folks. And so, look, we're globally deployed, for a reason. We are there in your time zone, like right next to you, shoulder to shoulder, doing the intimate work of planning and executing and evaluating. And so, look, we have very many proud intelligence professionals across the entire military and in the intelligence community, many of whom are civilians who are part of big organizations like CIA and DIA and NGA, who are also putting themselves at risk by going to the Middle East or by going into the Western Pacific and other places. And so we may not have the highest level of risk associated with being in the military or in this field, but we're as close as we possibly can to be able to fulfill our functions. I'm proud of what intelligence people do. They are making a difference every single day, and you can't count up how many lives they've saved or, how many good decisions they've supported, but I think they've made all the difference in the performance of what we do as a nation.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Well, listeners, listen, hit that link in the show notes for Might of the Chain, Forging Leaders of Iron Integrity. The book is awesome. It's going to take you a little bit to get through it.
If I could offer, so I did the audiobook myself on this because I thought people needed to hear from me. There's an ebook too if people want to do the ebook, not just the paperback. And so I hope people read and enjoy this. I also think that if anybody wants their son or daughter who may be kind of young adult, teenage, or young professionals, so they want to give them, the best tips for how to, assume more leadership responsibility. This is perfect for them. I was very fortunate. Henry Kissinger, actually, I think this was the last book that he read and endorsed before he died. Bob Gates, former Secretary of Defense and CIA director, also endorsed it and others. And so I've tried to do my best to pour all of the insights that I was lucky to gain and where I learned from other people and their example. I tried to package that all up in a way where it was easy to absorb, very short stories, and the chapters sort of move on. I believe that fundamentally our nation faces a leadership crisis. We are in a leadership deficit, that leadership affects every American. If we can get leadership right, I think everything else flows from that.
Yeah.
So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the book. Thanks for talking about it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sitting down with us, and it was just a fascinating conversation. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Larry. Honored to be here.
Well, listeners, we'll have another podcast next Monday morning at 0500. If you have any questions or suggestions, you can reach us at podcast@willingwarriors.org. You can find us on all the major platforms, and we're available on YouTube and Wreaths Across America Radio. So thanks for listening.
The Welcome Home podcast is brought to you by Willing Warriors, a nonprofit organization serving active duty service members and veterans since 2012. To learn more, please visit our webpage at willingwarriors.org.